I always think relationships are the best mirrors to how we show up and what's going on in our lives. So if you don't believe me, just evaluate or go back to any of your relationships and think about, what was that time when I had that huge argument with my partner? They were so freaking annoying. They were so frustrating. They said this, or like, you project onto them. But then when you stop and you think about it, you're like, but how was I showing up? You're like, whoa, maybe I was stressed out before I met them. Maybe I was dysregulated before I showed up. Maybe there was something they said that triggered the fuck out of me. That's when you'll see, oh my God, they're pulling out stuff out of me that I didn't even know that I had before. So if you can actually look and evaluate your relationships, any kind of relationship with your parent, with your partners, with your kids, with your friends, you can actually learn so much about yourself and how your ego shows up. So then we go back to the question, well, yeah, it's what the fuck is an ego? Like, dude, like I'm not cocky. I'm not this big, tough, like, aggressive human being. So maybe I don't have an ego. The ego is actually, it exists in every single one of us. It's a massive identity. I believe your exact word was the story of us, which I actually like that definition. What I like to think of the ego is as this protective mechanism, as this bodyguard. So think about you carrying this big bad bodyguard wherever you go. Now, this bodyguard's job is to protect you, yes, but the bodyguard is not going to protect you necessarily in the most charming way, affectionate way, or the way that most gets you like love and connection. He's going to do it, or she's going to do it in the most efficient way that just steps into not letting you witness your wound. That's the key thing. Now, this gets really interesting because remember we talked about partnerships. So that same moment where you see yourself attacking your partner and you're like, I'm doing it because they're aggressive. If you reel it in, you're like, maybe I'm doing it because I don't want them to see where I'm really hurting. Maybe I don't want them to see where I'm carrying my shame. Maybe I don't want them to see how I get really vulnerable. So when you start evaluating it like that, you start to see this ego or this protection mechanism that pops out a lot when you're projecting, you're shaming, you're judging. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it shows up in your environment more than you know. And that's why using your relationships is one of the best ways to see, okay, how am I actually bringing out my ego? And again, coming back to the concept of the ego, a lot of people are like ego death or like, slash the ego. The ego lives inside you. The only principle is how can I not use it as much as I'd like? So I specialize in relationships and inner child work. And what I tell people is you can either really act out of your inner child, which represents a lot of your innocence, your purity, who you really were before your conditioning. If you had love, support, and security, that like loving entity, who would they be? Or you can act out of your ego, who's this like dominant, protective individual who is not necessarily very, like I said, very loving or affectionate, but is very like efficient and wants to step in and break up like, and create your patterns. So if you have the two of them, you can't have both of them acting simultaneously. So if you find yourself in a spot where you're acting in a way that's not necessarily serving you, that's also a good reflection to say, okay, this is probably not the real me inside. This is my ego choosing to show up. So as we do the healing, as we go back to like what the ego is trying to protect in the first place, what is the wound or the sensitivity behind like the pain of where the ego shows up in the first place, and you start doing that healing, then now all you're doing is telling the ego, hey, listen, I don't need you to protect me like that anymore. I've got this. Like, I know where the pain's at. I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to go in for the protection. I'm willing to provide the love, the soothing, the balm. I'm willing to like to challenge myself and my insecurities. So I don't need you to step in with the same coping mechanisms, with the same like projections, with the same protection you are anymore. And that is how we, what I like to call, invalidate the ego. We basically tell the ego, I don't need your strength. I don't need you in this position. You can't necessarily kill the ego, because I think that itself is an egoistic act to attempt to kill the ego, right? You're like, I don't want to have an ego. I'm trying to kill my ego. But that itself is an egoistic act because you're trying to hide something, or you're getting to the shadow side of where you're trying to prevent like witnessing yourself and your truths. If you like this video, click below to like, to share, to subscribe, to do all those things, and follow this page, because we have so many more videos with this kind of magic, so to speak, inner work magic coming out. But make sure you like, follow, and subscribe. And more importantly, if you found value in this, share this with all your friends. Much love to you.